begin. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Ben Bout, founder and CEO at Facilitate. So we're running a special session today with our guest, Brad Chesham, founder and director of Bundle Arrays. So we're really here today to hear about Brad's journey and get any insights we can from his experience. So Brad's a unique individual in the VR learning sector. He's really an expert across a range of relevant areas, being a career nurse and developing his knowledge and skills as a VR facilitator and content creator over the past few years. So Brad, thank you so much for joining me today, all the way from South Korea.
Yeah, hey Ben. Yeah, thanks. That was a nice introduction. I don't know what an expert is these days, particularly in the world of virtual reality, but I definitely am a nurse. I can take that chalice for sure. I've done a bit of nursing, but VR is a wild world, which I'm sure we'll dig into at the moment. But no, good to be here. Yeah, I'm in Seoul in Korea, which is crazy in itself.
That's right.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no. Really happy that you're joining us today. So really, we like to jump in and ask a couple of questions to the audience when we start our webinars. Keen to get a sense of who's on the call. So firstly, which sector are you in? You know, we have on the cards here, healthcare, VR content creator, academia, learning designer, or the ever ambiguous other. So if people don't mind just throwing their answers into the mix there. And sorry, Tessa, I can't actually see the results, so you might need to talk to them.
Yeah, sure. So so far we've got a few people in healthcare, a few people in academia, and some learning designers, and some others. We don't have any content creators at the moment.
Actually recognize a few names on the attendee list, so I'll be popping out specific questions to these folks in the short term. So if you know me and you're on that list, watch out for some heavy hitting questions around what you're doing.
Excellent. Okay, and then just quickly, the second question, how familiar are you with VR? So the options are currently adopting it in my organization, looking to adopt it, generally researching the topic, so a little bit earlier on, and then quite unfamiliar. What's the background we've got today?
So again, this is quite spread out. Quite a few people already adapting it into the organization. Great. And some just generally researching the topic. Okay. Only a few that are unfamiliar with the technology.
Okay.
Now, while on that topic, I can't see any Korean names in that list, but I'll just give you an oversight of what I experienced last week. So I visited a hospital which is 3,000 beds. So Liverpool Hospital in Sydney, which is one of the largest trauma centres in Sydney, is about 850, 900 beds. So this hospital is 3 times bigger than basically our biggest hospital. Wow. They've been developing their own virtual reality applications in-house. So the hospital employs a VR team. And the applications that I used were better than any external provider that I've used. It was amazing. So applications around mechanical ventilation, tracheostomy management, and it's all been built by the hospital in a 4-year period. So the geographical, application and understanding of VR country to country is fascinating. You know, Bundle of Arrays does a bit of work in the US. Obviously, we're in Australia and now Korea, but unraveling and peeling off the layers to see where people are in the world of VR is an interesting experience. And there's so many siloed lessons learned, which is a shame. You know, it'd be so amazing if like this Korean hospital, for example, could share their data to the world. They train 400 nurses a month. And what they found over the last 3 years is that the nurses turn up to training more often. And they're actually better at using a mechanical ventilator than they were before they used it. So fascinating, and they're focused on improving their own business, which is awesome.
Yep. No, well, that's fantastic. That's really interesting insights, and again, I think unique perspective that you have, with a global product, but also currently residing in another country. So that's awesome. Cool. Okay. So we'll get just some of the formalities underway and just quick introduction of who Facilitate is, and then a bit more about Bundle the Race. And then we'll dive into some of the key areas for exploring Brad's brain. So, I want to give a quick introduction to Facilitate. So we're an Australian software company solely focused on achieving our mission to positively impact over 1 billion lives through better learning and training experiences. And the way we do this is through our Facilitate Immersive Learning Creation Suite that empowers anyone, learning designers, educators, trainers, SMEs, to create their own custom immersive learning content. The platform's tools enable learning creators that don't have software development skills or 3D design skills to create their own content and then distribute that at scale to learners, so either their customers or employees. So if you're interested to learn more, head to our website, facilitate.tech. So as we mentioned earlier, for those that don't know Brad, I'll give a bit more of an introduction. He's really a career frontline nurse that's worked in hospitals, health services across Australia and the UK, as well as having served in Afghanistan and Iraq as a battlefield nurse. The Bundle the Race solution immerses health professionals into an educational experience through the implementation of VR and AR. And really a global product and breaking out. Very proud to say that Facilitate's one of the solutions that Brad has partnered with, really, to deliver that product. So, Brad, thank you again for joining us today. Firstly, we'd like to kind of delve into one big question that earlier on, certainly when we started our business, that we hear time and time again. Why VR? So we're keen to get an understanding of what brought you to VR as a technology that can be more impactful in training nurses. And I guess even if you take a step back from that, prior to being involved in VR, what were the core problems you felt needed to be addressed in the way that nurses are trained?
Wow, we're going to get pretty raw pretty quick here. Healthcare training. And I'll probably swear a few times during this answer. But if you're a nurse, you work on the medical ward, and you want to be a better nurse, the concept of being competent versus being compliant is like the elephant in the room. So organizations are very focused on compliance training. They want you to do your mandatory training. They want you to know where the fire exits are, and they'll hassle the shit out of you to get that really boring stuff done, which it's essential. I get it. But they do have no engagement around that type of training. And there's very little investment in making you more competent. So, if you're actually better at doing physical assessment, for example, then you'll be able to pick up abnormalities with your patients faster. That will get escalated to the doctor sooner, and that patient potentially could have a better outcome. Now, most of that type of training really doesn't get the attention that it should. And also, we have these simulation centers. Like, I can't even explain how much money some of these centers get. Big build, like purpose-built buildings with mannequins that are $100,000, staff that get paid 120 grand a year. And, Jenny, the nurse on the medical ward, well, she never gets there. She never goes there. Usually it's for the resident doctors. They go do their training. And generally the nursing workforce has no access to that type of training. So what we end up doing is getting this mandatory training that's forced upon us, that you just click on a screen, which is terribly designed e-learning. And that concept of learning design in healthcare really doesn't exist to Jenny, the nurse on the medical ward. It's so hard to access exciting, innovative learning design. So what happens? People just get disengaged. Generally, people seek out external training. They might go to a conference a couple of days, or they might do a course here and there. But when scaling, like there's 29 million nurses in the world. I think there's 400,000 nurses in Australia. When you scale education, 9 times out of 10, the quality drops, right? You might have an amazing teacher who's in Sydney and they're in a particular classroom, and that you're always going to be constrained by the 4 walls of that classroom because you can't scale that amazing teacher. And since like antiquity, right, like the lecture is the focus of training, where people sit down in front of you with a piece of paper and a pen and they take notes from the learned person at the front of the room, right? So the question is, why virtual reality? And the answer is actually really simple. It's because currently training is a bit shit. And for the end user, that engagement piece around VR is powerful. Now, the other side of the coin is the market takes that and just spins some crap, and they tell stories about how amazing it is, but it actually, they go too far and they sell it way too much. But the core reality, once you strip off either extreme, is that it actually is a really good value proposition for Jenny on the medical ward to have a look at virtual reality. And you know, is there content at the moment available for Jenny? Well, actually, yeah, there probably is. From an adoption perspective, is that how do we make Jenny on the medical ward, who is the wheelhouse of the hospital? She's the most important person, you know, how do we make her better? And the answer is, well, we invest to make her better. And that doesn't mean cash, it means resources, time, innovative ideas to support Jenny to get a job done. I first got into virtual reality through art. And my friend, my friend curated an art gallery in Bethnal Green in London. I lived there for 8 years, and I used to go there drinking, which is pretty standard practice. But they would paint in VR and do some sort of early AR holographic artistic design type work. So that was about 8 years ago, and then the idea for the business was probably 5 or 4 years ago, and then I was operational with the business 3 years ago. So I really came to VR because of design. So I've always, you know, even look at applications now, like even some of the well-known applications. Is learning design really in the application, or are they just making VR stuff? This is a real crux of mine, is that, again, it's the learning design for Jenny on the medical ward at 10 o'clock at night when she's got a sick patient. You know, how do we enable and give Jenny the confidence to make good decisions? So that's why VR, I suppose. And you know,
what was it? What was it that allowed you to draw the link between what you saw in the design and art space and what could bring to nursing though?
I think 3D visualization is interesting. You know, you can, if you put on a VR headset for the first time and you look at, I don't know, anything, let's just say a heart, we'll keep it healthcare focused. So if you put a headset on and there's a heart in front of you, and you can walk around that heart, and then you can pull that heart apart, immediately you can understand how educationally that could be a valuable tool. The problem is, one 3D model doesn't have any pedagogy. There's no tactic to teach you how to keep that information in your brain, because I'm not teaching you about what a 3D heart looks like. I need to teach you about a heart attack, a myocardial infarction. So there's the teaching tactic to take a 3D item, apply a tactic, so Jenny absorbs that information sooner, faster, and cheaper than she would using an e-learning resource. And I wholeheartedly believe that virtual reality can make that offering. So what led me to here was simple 3D visualization from where you start, and then the complexities of how you take that 3D visualization and make it become a business efficiency. That's the interesting part.
No, that's a fascinating insight. And keen also to understand, you know, what was actually your first step to exploring VR for nursing training? How did you go from this is a great idea to I'm actually experimenting here and seeing what works and what doesn't?
Yeah, I think this is sort of the part of my business, which is a bit, again, it's probably a raw answer, but there's sort of no bullshit. Like I don't have time I don't have any marketing. I don't do any marketing. And when I first started the business, it was me on the street with, you know, like all the other founders in VR, I got a Vive headset with the telescopic stands and the cases, and I got on the planes, and I literally traveled around Australia. Like the only way I was going to find out if an idea works was to work, and I worked hard at it. I think I traveled. I've been to Darwin. There's a few people on the line here from out in rural Queensland. I've been all over Victoria, New South Wales. I was going away from my family, which is, to me, is the biggest sacrifice I could ever make. And I was learning, like I was using the VR in a classroom. So we would teach things like ECGs and chest X-rays, and I would deploy 1 to 5 headsets in a classroom. So those 2 years of me driving around and actually teaching, like I was the person in the classroom, the headsets wouldn't go onto Wi-Fi, someone would fall over, people would wear makeup and get the headsets all dirty. Like those 2 years were the most valuable intricacies of understanding how virtual reality could contribute to education that I could have done. And I think that's what sets our company apart a little bit from other companies, because the founders or the process of the company is very business driven, right? They're looking at how they onboard users. They're looking at what the cost of acquisition of a customer is, all the fundamental business components. But the real world connection of actual using the VR for its core product purpose, there's a gap there in some companies. And it's not that I'm proud of it, but that's just organically how our business was built. So, if I sell VR to somebody, I understand the challenges they're going to have, and then our company can help provide the services to support that process.
No, I think that's brilliant. And it's as you're saying, it's unique as well, because one of the key benefits is as you're kind of hinting at before, standardization of quality training and learning for people obviously in remote areas, and having that experience on the ground, seeing what works, what doesn't, what the limitations are, what the challenges are for those people and the people that are trying to help them implement. That is gold. That really is gold in any new technology, but certainly for VR.
Blows my mind. Like Queensland Health, New South Wales Health, any major health service, this massive employer can't even predict what the annual salary of nursing wages are, right? And then you've got nursing educators who earn like 100 or 120 grand a year. And then you look at something simple like telemetry monitoring. So, nearly every nurse that works in like emergency or, maybe in perioperative environment where they need some monitoring afterwards. The one topic which never changes, right? Because it's a process in the human body. It doesn't change. It's taught differently in every single health service. Like the concept of standardizing training across one employer should be like a low-hanging fruit. So they've got these people who are on like 100 to 120 grand a year in all these different health services, creating different like workbooks, different processes around the same piece of training. I get that there might be some innovation where that training might change in terms of to try things like VR or to try AR, or they're pushing the training in advanced level, but it's not. It's just the same pedagogical output of high scale, low quality. So the ability to standardize, meaningful, engaging training with these new technologies is definitely there. Oh,
that's great. So if we move on to sort of outcomes and challenges, let's look at some of the outcomes that you're finding are being generated. I guess what are some of the results that you're seeing compared to existing dominant forms of training? Any sort of specifics?
I think what I'd say initially is like, I hate Zoom. Right, what we're doing right now, like I love you and I love Facilitate and I love the concepts, but we've got, I don't know how many people sitting in the attendee list, and I'd love for them to be active in there's a very passive process, right? So the outcome is that we can generate curiosity and intrigue. Like an outcome to me is the excitement that nurses get when they can do something innovative. Like the concept of innovation in a hospital is just so like it's borderline impossible to change a hospital's policies. And healthcare, you look at the tech adoption in healthcare, they're just so slow. You might have a couple of digital health leaders that talk about wearables and talk about this, but it is a battleship, man. And if you're going to change that battleship in 3 months, then you are kidding yourself. So being a startup working in healthcare, first of all, you better have a good psychologist that's around the corner so you can talk to. But it's hard work. So the outcomes are, I don't puff my chest out and celebrate my wins too often, because I've got 2 babies at home. I've got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. Plus, I'm living in Korea, for God's sake. So like I'm quite busy. But I should puff my chest out and I should be happy with where we are, because as a company, I started as a nurse. I was working in ED and ICU like full time, running the business for 2 years. And I think one of the biggest outcomes now is that I get to choose when I go to bed. I get to choose when I wake up. I work from home. I can come and live in Korea. I'm a nurse that works for myself and chooses my own hours. To me, I've already won. You can take your investors and all that. That to me is an amazing achievement. And I don't know a lot of nurses that have been able to do that. So every now and then I might pat myself on the back for that, because in healthcare, that's not an easy task. So that's outcome number one for Brad, the human. There's 2 different differentiations here. There's the human and then there's the company. So for the company, I've got a 3-year contract with Ohio State University in the US. They're the #1 online master's program for nursing in the USA. There is 6 million nurses in the USA. There is not a better partner or a contract that we could get than working with Ohio State. And I'm extremely proud that we've been able to connect with them. And, we've helped them build a vision, and it's underway. And, it's amazing. The work that they're going to do off the back of the catalyst that we've started is going to change nursing. I have no doubt about that. Talking to the team with them, which we do regularly. They're a great bunch of people and they're not going to go shy on the innovation. So very proud of that. And then same principle, I don't know a lot of companies in Australia that have been able to set up shop in the US, right? Like we've just done it. I just signed another deal with Kansas University this morning. We're going to be delivering another project. We're setting up an office in January over in the US. Like, without even blinking, I didn't even think about it, but we've already done it. It's sort of behind us now when we're looking at scaling up. So meanwhile, I'm filling in my paperwork this afternoon after this webinar to set up our company in Korea. And I fly to London on the 16th of September to open our UK office. So again, blink my eyes at Christmas time, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to have an international company. So they're pretty decent outcomes for the business. In terms of outcomes, in terms of the VR training, I think there's a few people from Southwest Queensland on the call here. They're our biggest customer. And, they've extended all their licenses to 2024. They're an advocate for us. They've had their challenges, they're rural and remote, and that shit ain't easy, man. Like some nurses, there's like 3 nurses in the whole hospital, and here they are trying to get onto Wi-Fi and deploy a future focused simulation based training. But they've worked hard at it and they've put some time into it and they've done really, really well. And they're a great success story, because shit, if we can send VR to the desert basically, or a pretty remote area, and they can operate it in an efficient business manner, well, it's going to work most other places, right? It's some of the harshest conditions within Australia, definitely. Yeah. And, to sit parallel to that conversation is that we've just done a deal with a company in Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka's economy has literally just collapsed. They can't even afford fuel. I called the guys, I bought the VR headsets and they got delivered to some shop, and they didn't even have petrol to drive the car to go pick up the headsets. So, we have this low middle income strategy. I worked in Mosul in Iraq during the ISIS war, which is up north, which was the center for the caliphate for ISIS, right? So I worked up there and I know the faculty at Mosul University. And one of the remits of my company is to be no bullshit marketing-based company where we sell a story that we don't have, right? I think VR can really touch the real world and make a difference. So we focus on, if we make a bit of money, then I spend a bit of money in an area that needs it. And we've done that with Sri Lanka, and I'm really proud of that. And that's a 2-year deal where they're going to be able to link in with the UK and the US and get accessible training in a low I don't think it even, I think they're like the second poorest country right now in the world because their economy has collapsed so much. So being able to provide a VR hub where they can access educators globally and their nurses can be trained in that manner is really, really cool.
No, that's fantastic. One thing that we hear about organizations considering this technology, but balking really is its cost. So in those environments, if there's anyone that that's on the call that's sort of considering the implementation of VR, but really struggling with the cost of headsets, so what advice could you give them in terms of the options that are available to them?
Sorry, could you just repeat that question?
Yeah, sure. Well, basically, I guess it's a general question. Anyone that's sort of balking at the cost of VR, what do you say to them, in particular, if they're looking at headsets and limitations of what they can purchase?
Headsets are a nightmare, man. You know that. Companies.
That's why I asked you.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Look, this is the part of my business that I sort of take a bit of pride in, because it's a fragmented industry. There's good products out there. The headsets are awesome using, I've always been a good advocate and a good partner with HTC. We sell a fair bit of their product, the Focus 3, but in reality, it's like 3 or 4 times more expensive than other headsets. So it's a great product, but if you're going to buy 50 of them, it's a challenge for the end user, like just on price. And then you've got Quest headsets, which are owned by Facebook and Meta. And, one of our partners, Kansas University, they've got 50 Quests, right? And they've just changed to the Meta account, and they're having all these problems with the account management based stuff. And it's just annoying. I just don't, if you bought a laptop in the 90s and you bought the laptop and you just wanted to use an Excel spreadsheet, these complexities with the hardware weren't really as challenging as they are with VR. And I sort of equate the hardware adoption to how we adopted laptops. Really, the laptop itself is a vessel. You want it to be functional. You don't want it to be too heavy so you can carry it around. It's got to have the ergonomics. And then the content that you put on the laptop, well, that's where the magic's going to come for your specific business, right? So from the hardware perspective, you just want it to be functional. You want it to connect to Wi-Fi. You just want it to be reliable, really. And then there's the cost barriers. So, countries like Sri Lanka, we're looking at leasing adoption processes where maybe you can spend $2,000 on a headset, but pay it off over in a monthly installment but the evolution of the hardware is also fascinating, much like laptops, right? In Korea here, man, everyone has a folding phone. They all have Samsung phones, right?
Really? Okay.
Yeah. In Australia, very few people have these Samsung folding phones. And you see them and they're so small, and they pop them up and they're looking at their scrollable graphic novels, and you just think, fuck, the world is such a crazy place. But we didn't start there, right? The big chunky mobile phones. I remember Grant Kenny paddling out to under the Sydney Harbour Bridge, taking a phone call off the Prime Minister, back in, I don't even know when that was, but
got to be mid-90s, sounds like it.
Yeah. But, the Vive Flow, you look at that and I don't know, it's 300-400 grams. It makes sense. Of course, the hardware is going to go in that direction, right? And that's something that we're recommending our users to investigate now. But, even the new Quest headset, you can see it's still whatever they're going to call it, that's going to be announced in October, but it's still pretty chunky. The ergonomics of everybody's talking about Joe Rogan's podcast with Mark Zuckerberg, and I get it, concept of human connection, element of presence, but they talk about fitness in VR. Are you serious, man? I don't know if you work out and you start sweating in a headset, who's going to enjoy that? That's a big challenge. So ergonomics are important. The functionality, device management, companies like Arbor and Manage XR are doing great. But Pico and owned by ByteDance now, it's just every 6 months it changes. You see how I've given you a non-specific answer? Brutal.
Yep.
But it's a bit of an oversight, right? And there's all these VR consultants out there now. Yeah, and there's VR consultants out there that can help guide you through, like us, really. But it's a challenge for the end user. You know, if my name was Mary and I'm working in rural Western Australia, and I thought, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to buy some VR, right? Mary gets online. You know what I say to Mary? Good luck. She's got a lot to learn before she starts spending 20 or 50K on some VR. You know, she's got to spend a lot of time researching, and, you know, having companies like mine. There's another guy in Sydney, Michael Midas, who's an absolute champion, that help people make these decisions. But it's a big ask for the end user, and that's what I worry about. You know, you want the end user to be the tip of the spear with these processes. So I think that's sometimes where the hardware, as I said, the fragmentation loses the perspective of reducing friction for the end user.
I think you know, you mentioned Mary that works in the rural health service. It's probably a good segue to kind of delve into, you know, what are some of the main challenges that you think for someone who wants to lead with this technology actually are, and have they evolved over time, you know, since you started, or the fundamental challenges still there?
Can I just interrupt you, Ben? I just noticed someone's popped a question on the Q&A. Do you mind if I just answer that before we move on? Is that all right?
Yeah, no, sure, go for it.
So I think Ron Stevens has just asked, Australian hospitals have no money for expensive headsets, unfortunately. Now, the thing is, for Ron, is that you probably have mannequins, mate, and your current status quo that you spend on education and training, there is budget there. The question is, and this is my big question to nursing generally, is how do you innovate, right? And what is the current cost of your training? In healthcare, nobody can ever answer me. If I say, what does it cost you to run this simulation center every year? Nobody can ever just say, oh, that cost me $2 million. You know, there's the variables of the nursing educators who get paid pretty well. There's the mannequins, the air conditioning, the electricity, the actual physical space. The status quo is expensive. And in rural areas, you know, it's very difficult to retain nursing educators. And this is one of the value propositions of VR, is that you don't need an educator to be on site, because they can log in via VR from England, or from, you know, you could get an expert from another location. The innovation around absolutely disagree, because, all right, yeah, when people say virtual reality is expensive, I absolutely disagree. Yeah, you know, headsets can cost money and stuff, but the status quo is ridiculously expensive. So the business case, what we do now, what we do with VR, you'll probably find that VR is cheaper if it's wielded properly. No, sorry, got on a bit of a rant there.
No, it's a very good point, because when you compare against the status quo, and you know, we've worked with customers in different industries that costing tens of thousands of dollars to provide training, because they're using live equipment that, you know, needs to be taken out of the field, put into a training capacity, sending people to and fro different locations. These are all things that VR could actually help overcome and reduce the costs, you know, and allow people to practice in effective ways far more often. I mean, back to the question I had, in Brad, are the challenges changing for people that are really trying to be leaders innovating with VR in healthcare?
I don't know if the challenges are changing. It's coming easier, right? Like as the content matures, and, you know, I talked about like HTC before, like even their maturity and the range of headsets that they offer is more than what it was. You know, there's a bigger range and there's more services pushed in as an enterprise device. So it's getting easier slowly. The change in the challenges are the evolution of the process, like learning design. So like if you're a nursing educator, you get zero education around instructional design, you know, how to set up quality teaching. You know, very few nurses that I know of anyway have had focused training on actually being good educators. A lot of nurses who end up in education are just nurses that like education, and they very much lack educational training. And if they do a master's in education, which is good, but it's educational theory. It's not the construction of education. You know, it's another bugbear about the university system that just drives me bananas, is they like to put out certificates, but the actual real world tangibility in industry sometimes is pretty questionable, particularly in nursing. Like, I did a postgraduate in intensive care, and zero of that was based around physical assessment and skills. It was stuff I could have just reviewed, and you pay a lot of money for it. So it's challenging, but this can probably be broken into different components. You know, device management from the beginning. You know, what is the device? How do I manage it? Where does it live? You know, is the library going to loan it out? Am I going to lease it? You know, that's the first one. The next one is, how do we deploy this shit? Like, okay, how do we roll it out? Do we have a VR familiarization plan? Do we spend 3 to 6 months just showing people ping pong and putt-putt golf to get them using the headsets? Do we create a working group in the organization that talk about best practices, research best practice? What learning data? This is another big bugbear. Probably another point for Ron is that if you go into VR and do your current status quo training, what data about Jenny on the medical ward do we actually have to say that Jenny in January versus Jenny in December is a better nurse? Now, what makes a better nurse is a good question, but there is quantifiable data that we can measure. And in nursing, that is so weak. So in VR, there's all these data points that we can now capture and monitor Jenny's training. So we can actually quantifiably say that Jenny is now better at doing advanced life support because she's practiced it 100 times. And she puts the oxygen on faster. She identified cardiac arrest faster. And we can show that in virtual reality. We're in status quo training. So the challenge around that, to answer your question, is understanding what data we can get out of VR and where does that get housed. And then this opens up a whole kettle of cybersecurity, data management, all that kind of stuff, which is just technology adoption. But they're the challenges. And all of these challenges this year are more mature than the challenges from last year. It's like just the evolution of general mass adoption. And people like Ohio, you know, Southwest Queensland, these guys are sort of the thought leaders that are showing the industry about, you know, what's been done, how we did it. You know, we got this wrong, but we got that right. And setting up those collective bodies of, and again, it's real world examples. You know, there's a lot of people out there telling you how to do it, but they don't do it. They're just advising you on VR. So getting feedback off actual users is pretty critical. So yeah, I think the challenges are the exciting parts, to be honest. That's the innovation. So I think mindset, having the space and the safety to change is the hardest part. I think in nursing, being provided the leash to make a mistake. In healthcare, and when I say make a mistake, it's not like we're going to hurt a patient. Like, the risk is so low, it's ridiculous. The mistake is that maybe you've lost a bit of time. And, you know, you might deploy the headsets and you might have deployed the wrong piece of content, right? And then you learn from that and then you deploy the next piece of content. But I think the mindset around innovation in healthcare, tangible mindset around change is the challenge, because we're not talking about technology. We're talking about humans. The humans run the technology. So the biggest challenges is the human to human, and managing humans is never easy.
Okay. All right. No, that's fantastic. Thanks for that. So I think we'll have a quick pause at this point and ask another poll question. So we'll kind of shift the conversation over towards more use cases. So based on what people know about VR learning, what Brad said so far, you know, which use case do you see as VR potentially being best suited for. So there's a whole range of areas really that technology could have application. So from soft skills, difficult conversations, patient education, to providing better understanding to patients, for example, when they're going to undergo a procedure, onboarding for new employees, giving them a better understanding of their work environment, pain management or distraction, equipment training, as Brad was saying, people to get familiar with pieces of equipment in a low risk environment, through to technical training around procedures, helping people to better understand step-by-step processes, or again the ambiguous other, any other ideas. So Tessa, how are the responses coming?
They're slowly coming in. I think people are looking at all the options at the moment. Technical training is currently taking the lead with 57%, and followed by soft skills.
Okay, it's interesting.
Yeah, there's still some people that are left to vote. So wait a few minutes.
Yeah.
So just while they're answering there, I think the important thing on this slide is you've got pain management. So that's a digital therapeutic. So it's fundamentally different than the other areas there. So, for example, Southwest Queensland have like 30 headsets or whatever it is. They're all used for learning and development at the moment. But in healthcare in the future, there's going to be a doctor or there's going to be a nurse that specializes in digital medicine or digital therapeutics. So those headsets can be deployed to the pediatric ward for distraction. They might be on the rehab ward helping someone physically rehabilitate after a surgery. It could be with the chronic pain team around back pain, to the mental health department treating people with depression, and they're actually used for patients and for treatment. So the distinction of use cases is we're just at the pioneer stage of this, right? Like 30 years of VR has been built to get us to here, to the Quest 2. This is the way I talk about it, because the Quest 2 has fundamentally changed the way that we absorb consumer VR because they just made the price so low. It's a marketing ploy on their behalf, but it's very clever because they just saturated the market with a pretty good headset that's cheap and people bought it. So now they've used VR, they understand it, so there's adoption. And now they've increased the price and they're going to bring out a new headset that's even more expensive. So they've hooked the market. I get it. But now that people have headsets, this concept of headset utility, how do I make this one resource a true resource across the organization, not for one department, is the really, that's the fun part. It's now seeking out other people in the organization that wish to explore this technology for a multitude of reasons. But we're going to spend the next 10 or 15 years going through adoption, development, 20 to 30 years, people like Walter Greenleaf, all those guys have been working so hard to build up research around to get us to today. And now I feel like it's companies like myself and you guys and all the other providers to understand the adoption process. That'll be the next 10 to 15 years.
Okay. No, that's fantastic insights. So keen for your opinion on this question as well, Brad. With your experience, the nursing practitioner that's really been working with this technology now for a number of years. If you can list the top three, either in nursing or broader healthcare use cases.
Golf's got to be number one, I think.
It has utility, definitely.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but socialization is important, man. Particularly if you're in a rural, regional area. So, but no, that's just a piss take. So the top three. Simulation is carving out to be a busy market. There's a lot of providers around simulation, SimX, UBSim, Oxford Medical, and they all VR patients. They all seem like really good healthcare VR training providers. And I've really noticed in the last 12 to 18 months, they're focusing on nursing. So that's a good area to go into. SimX is the only provider from a learning design perspective that doesn't have unnatural touch points. So things like drop-down menus, it's an intrinsic workflow from simulation. So I prefer SimX, and we work with SimX. So simulation is a low-hanging fruit, right? Like if you're going to learn how to fly a helicopter, you've got to go in the helicopter simulator. Now, in healthcare, if you want to learn how to save someone's life, well, at the moment, you've either got to practice on a real person, which is kind of crazy, or you practice on this mannequin where, you know, using a mannequin is just telling yourself a story. You could put a teddy bear on the bed and you could tell yourself a story that you're still doing the same workflow, because you're not truly training yourself on the skill. You're training yourself on the process, you know, how to use the equipment, where the equipment lives. So, you know, simulation is just a great space for virtual reality to come into. So that's exciting. I think the other one, which is really, and this is what my business does, so here comes the plug, is curriculum. And this is probably a use case that hasn't been adopted much yet, but I can see that it's just gonna change the way we think about a university, for example. So if you can put a headset on and attend a lecture, right? But it's not a lecture, you know, you attend an experience. So there's the sequence of experiences that fulfill your curriculum. Your teacher will be an amazing teacher because we can now scale quality teachers. And your classmates could be from all over the world. So you've got things like diversity, inclusion, you know, all these really amazing capabilities. And when you're learning a topic, like we just did a topic around chest pain, and there's a heart right there. You can break it apart. There's an ECG. You can do some problem solving. You can pick things up. There's interactivity. You've got problem-based learning, active learning, a level of agency. All of this stuff in the one element of learning design, where you just can't incorporate all of that into a PowerPoint presentation. And the more and more I think about exactly what we do as a business is that we are the future of PowerPoint. You know, PowerPoint will become less and less utilized, and VR will become more and more prominent. So if you're going to give a lecture on 30 minutes about neurology, you're going to do that in an immersive environment. You're going to stop using PowerPoint. And I think for a university where currently you pay 30 grand a year to do nursing and your lecturers send you links to YouTube, I think there's a lot of value that can be created by having immersive environments for that end user. So I think the academia should be really excited about 3D instructional learning design in nursing. I'm surprised that nursing academics aren't falling over themselves to try and make it more exciting for their learners. And maybe over the next 2 or 3 years they will. That part of a use case is exciting. And the third one is obvious, you know, soft skills training. We work really closely with a company called Body Swaps. But the ability to create empathy and practice communication, like, of course, that's awesome. You know, people suck at communication. Like I've worked in intensive care my whole life. The amount of time I've seen a doctor tell some family members that a patient is going to die, and the way that they communicated that to the family was borderline abhorrent, you know. So breaking bad news, telling people they're going to lose a toe, you know, any kind of grief or loss process in a healthcare system, that level of communication takes skill, and you've got to have finesse, and you've got to be a good listener. And currently, there's no real fantastic way to practice or learn that stuff that's, got some, again, quantifiable measure where you can see that you're improving. But stuff like the work that Body Swaps is doing, you know, they're really trying to achieve that. So kudos to them. So they're probably my 3 top use cases would be simulation, like straight up hard skill simulation, curriculum development, and soft skills training.
Okay, great. No, that's fantastic. I'm just conscious of time. So we'll move on to the next part. So, you know, for those in the audience that can see the potential of VR for their organization, learning programs, you know, what are some general pieces of advice that you would give them about getting underway?
Don't buy the headset that she's wearing. That'll be my first advice.
You'd love the stock photos in VR.
I think focus on the problem. Don't focus on the solution. That sounds cheesy coming from a startup, because every startup says that, because they have a solution, right? It's a sales thing. But like, what is your problem? You know, like that's the first thing. What problems do you have in your learning and development? Like, for example, healthcare is simulation. It's expensive and it's hard to access. Okay, great. So they're two significant problems that you have. You know, another problem is you have an amazing teacher, but you can't scale them. You've only got one of them. You know, like a few rural and regional areas, it's really hard to retain a workforce in a rural area. But if you've got one amazing teacher who lives out there, you know, there's a lady, I forget her last name, Naomi. She's been at Alice Springs for like ever, and she's awesome. She's the ICU educator there. She's incredible. But you know, how do you scale a person like that? And nursing deserves those people. You know, they've worked their whole life grinding it out at the bedside, and they're a wealth of knowledge. Find your problems. Once you've got your problems, talk to people. I think, again, it's not technology, it's human to human. That's where you're going to get your most value. So I'd talk to people, avoid trade conferences. You know, they're just like, buy my shit. The more people offer me to have a booth at a trade center, the more I feel nauseous. It's like, hey, come and buy my shit. You know, we've got this feature, we've got that feature. And I get it, it's networking, but it just feels too marketing and salesy. And yeah, that's what we all get together for. But I think having some real world opportunities to have true, honest conversations around things like operational deployments and budgets. So yeah, talking to people, find out what your problems are. And then once you've sort of got to that point, make sure you've got a 3-year plan. You know, don't buy VR for the short term, because you could buy 5 headsets and they're just going to gather dust.
Yeah.
But on that note is that you build a vision, right? This is my 3-year vision, and start small, but make sure you've got gateways, right? So you can measure your output over time. So buy, say, 5 headsets, and in 3 months, collect some certain metrics that you've set, predetermined. If you meet those metrics, then move to stage 2 and then gain more metrics. So have a measured approach that's built by the team from the outset. The only other thing is consensus. This is, you know, a real problem in healthcare. Consensus destroys innovation. So if you're in a team and you say to people, I've got this idea, I've got this budget, what do you think? People are going to say it's shit, or they're going to say, I don't like it. So again, it's that safety and the space to be innovative with the mindset. And not everyone is always going to like everything. Like some people don't like simulation with mannequins, but we still use them consistently every single training center, right? So consensus, be wary of consensus, even though it's a team sport. If you're going to drive innovation, it's got to be driven by somebody. So they'd be my biggest things to start with: is build a vision, start small, drive innovation, talk to humans, and it's innovation isn't easy, but you got to work on it, and you know, it's exciting. So make sure you got a passion for it.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, for anyone that is listening to this and is actually interested in understanding what bundled arrays can do to support in that journey from, you know, the first steps to setting that vision, how can they get underway with you? Like what kind of support can you give them from that stage all the way through to scaling across their organization?
Yeah, so we've, you know, by working with like government organizations and international providers, we really have like a fixed sort of sales pathway now, whereby, you know, we consult, we do demos, we follow up with consults, we start with a pilot, then we go into a 3-stage process over 3 years. And we sort of say to clients now that, you know, we don't want to just sell you 200 grand's worth of VR straight up. We can, and that's awesome. But there's a lot of work to do in the interim. And sometimes people are constrained by things like grants, you know, like they've got 200 grand, so they've got to spend it. And that's perfect. And, you know, we can do that as well, but you have to build internal capacity around this stuff to reduce risk. So, you know, starting with a pilot and then scaling up, it just makes sense. And working through that, you know, we've already got surveys and things that we deploy at 3 and 9 months from sales, and to capture data for management. Because the thing is, we want to train Jenny on the medical ward, but Jenny doesn't pay. So we have to convince the CFO to buy this stuff.
Yeah.
So there's mixed messages as a business around that. So we need to make sure that Jenny on the medical ward is empowered and confident around getting her training done. We need to know that her educator knows how to wield this thing. And then we have to do the business part and get the CFO to sign off on it. So, you know, that stuff's tricky, but, you know, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and anybody ever needs any advice, you know, no commitments or whatever, we can always talk people through different plans. Like here in Korea, we're working with the private high school, you know, we're acting as consultants. So we do a variety of different services.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Oh, that's great. So we've got 3 minutes. Well, I guess we're going to open up the floor for probably 1 or 2 questions before we wrap up. So I'm not sure were there any questions that people wanted to ask Brad before we finish?
I sounded pretty opinionated through that webinar. I'm sure people are saying, he's so full of shit on that part, but this part might have been true. Oh, that was interesting, but God, man, feel free to come at me.
Well, we're going to need to limit the answer to 2 minutes. So if you could project forward 10 years, you know, the crystal ball question, what role do you think immersive technologies could play in nursing education? Oh, slightly frozen there, Brad.
I think they'll be fundamentally 30% part of undergraduate curriculum. I think university, fundamentally academia will change, and immersive technologies will have a huge impact. I think students will be doing 20 to 30% of their teaching in a headset. I think hospital settings, things like simulation will be happening remotely. So you'll be able to train multinationally. So I think, you know, you'll be able to train with American teams in doing work. I think the headsets and the hardware will just be lighter and smaller and smoother. The transition of AR to VR will become a one headset piece where you put it on, tap a button, it's VR, tap a button, it's AR, tap a button, it's a pair of sunglasses. The element of human presence and connection is just going to get richer. So, but I think that the biggest disruption will be academia. You know, I can't believe they've been so slow on this tech. So I think it'll be very interesting to see how they adopt it at scale. Because I think they get intimidated, but you know, they're already adopting tech at scale. I don't think it's a huge jump. So that's off the hip, a few ideas.
Cool. No. Well, I couldn't agree more. We're basically bang on an hour now. That's all we've got time for. You know, thank you for everyone tuning into the webinar with Brad at Bundle the Race. Thank you, Brad, so much for your insights and wisdom and your willingness to share with us all. And if anyone is interested in joining Brad to become a leading innovator in this space in their health organization, please get in touch with him, and I'm sure he'll set you on the right path.
Well, we can only hope so, Ben.
Or drastically down the wrong direction.
Yeah.
But
anyway. No, thanks for having me, and
that's all right.
Appreciate the space to talk about the business. We've achieved a lot, and it is a fascinating story as it continues to unravel. So it's good to be along the ride with Facilitate. I appreciate it.
No, thanks, mate, and everyone have a good day.
Cool.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.